want to pick up on something Asaf mentioned, but get Jason to answer first before we go back to Asaf. Asaf mentioned about VDI and desktops. I mean, you're recently arrived in the vendor market, from the end user world. And we were talking about, what's motivating and enabling cloud projects. And you're saying some things to me around about, where there's a pain point, it causes the initiative to take off.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, taking VDI as an example, some of the drivers that I've seen around that have been, for instance, providing an alternative to a business continuity recovery facility. So that's one. People have real estate optimization programs. So how can we create a more mobile employee workforce and actually optimize or reduce the amount of seats that we actually carry? Typically in the past, people have been very much anchored to their PC and anchored to their phone. So that's a case where I've seen VDI used. And again, anecdotally, when it snowed, it was a year and a half. It always seems to snow at the moment. But when it snowed, I think about a year ago or so, I mean, from a continuity point of view, if you couldn't get into the office, you could probably continue to work through VDI. So I think there's a lot of use cases, especially around VDI, that make it very valuable and business relevant.
Asaf, is that where you were thinking in terms of that's where you've seen some of these projects start in terms of?
Yeah, I think it's a combination that, it's on one side the demand and the other side on the provider's end, I think some of the technologies weren't ready. Technologies weren't scalable enough. I think we've gone a long way in terms of the compute side, the virtualization side, that these parts can scale now to thousands of physical machines. But if you look at the one point that I still think is a big headache for all these people that are designing now or implementing, it's the storage piece. And I think it's no surprise that there's no real presence here on the panel for storage vendors. It's on the cost side, it breaks the cloud model, too expensive. On the technology side, it's not scalable enough, it doesn't perform. I was just in several meetings the last couple of days, and the single biggest complaint of the end users that are building these clouds is how to deal with the storage. And this is something that the vendors are looking at improving, not the storage vendor, the other vendors.
Okay. Good. I've worked through most of the comments which have come up in note form here. Are there any questions which I haven't addressed from the audience? Anthony? Yes, please do.
So we came up with a quiz. When will someone put a $100 million market on close order in an icy cloud? If it fails to submit, who is liable? What do the lawyers and regulators have to say?
I guess Tariq would love to answer that one. Give her the microphone for Tariq. Did you? Tariq, you want to go? Duncan.
That's a very tricky question, and I'm going to have to come back to you on that.
I think it was meant to be.
Let me put that to our lawyers, and maybe I can get your details.
Right.
So what that's saying is that
no comment. Right.
What that's saying is lawyers always win, basically. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? At the back there, Richard, microphone at the back. Behind the pillar.
In the cheap seats.
Hello, panel. What do you see as the role, having been a CIO and now working for a very large IT company, what do you see as the CIO's role as cloud emerges as an external and generic provider of IT services to many, many businesses, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's applications, whether that's application assembly and development, etc. What's the role of the CIO going forwards, in a detailed sense?
I'm getting body language from Darian on that one.
It's an interesting question. I think
That's an interesting question. That was a difficult question, guys. Right, just note the difference. Right.
The question that our table came up with actually kind of reflects that, which is what does a cloud look like in 2010, or compared to what it looks like in 2021, right? And if you fast forward through that time frame, the CIO's role when you're in the world of a hybrid architecture, to some degree, is that of kind of risk manager more than anything, because in 10 years from now, will your line of business always be able to know whether or not they're operating on an internal architecture or an external architecture, and should they care? So I think it's managing the risk of those kinds of capabilities in the business lines and ensuring that agreements are held to and kept up to, because somebody's going to be in the line of fire when something goes wrong and they're going to want to know where to go. Managing that risk is, I think, one of the CIO's most critical functions.
Asaf, I'll come back down.
So, going back to implementing private clouds within this organization, I think the key role is to get the people within the different groups, whether the server people, the compute part, the storage guys, the networking guys, to work together, because we have seen lots of projects that didn't take off or took for ages just because of the internal politics of who takes control and who talks with who and their preferred technology and so on, and that didn't work. And whenever there was a CIO that had enough guts to make these guys work together, it worked much better. So I think it's a matter of that.
So it's some of the same disciplines we've known about. Duncan? Yeah.
Yeah, it's partly politics, but I think also it's, and here and now rather than in 2021 or something, it's about realizing that it's something you have to approach strategically, not piecemeal. So, you know, there are no quick wins that you can build on, certainly investments you've made around things like virtualization and so forth, but I think you actually have to take it very, very seriously and understand that it is an evolving space. So, you know, hybrid is not, I mean, there's a great debate about whether hybrid is an end game or some sort of stopping off point along the way. I think if you're a startup, it's almost an irrelevance, because you can pretty much do everything from the get-go using cloud that's out there. I don't want to say public, but, you know, external. But if you're an enterprise, you have a tremendous set of resources that you still want to sweat. You may want to do that for decades or more, but make sure it's a strategy, not something you just dream up on a Sunday night and try and implement on a Monday morning.
So it's a philosophy away for John.
This will sound a little controversial, hopefully, but I think the role of a CIO is to tell the vendors what you want as a cloud. Because in reality, cloud is the chance for the customers to come back and say, well, look, we've been driven by the shape of boxes, the type of networking, the type of storage for so long. We now want to look at IT as a business properly. This is what we want to see in 5 years, and challenge the vendors to hit it. You know, you've done it once in the market with, hey, our data centers can't produce any more power, change the CPU infrastructure. You've achieved that once in a very big way in the marketplace, do it again. You know, and challenge the vendors you're working with, and if they can't deliver against your goals in 5 years, work with someone else. And that's your role, is to make sure you get what you want, not do what the vendors tell you should do.
Okay, I'm going to now use table 6 questions which they submitted to some panel up. Great questions. And I'm going to run all the way down, right, so you get a kind of concluding piece. Table 6 are asking, what does the cloud of 2021 look like? And how does it work? That's in a soundbite, not an essay. Right, and I'm nervous, isn't this just another .com bubble, a fashion? So what does it look like in 2021? Is it a fad? David said it wasn't. Jason?
I don't believe it's a fad. What's it going to look like in 2021? Really good question. I think all of the aspects that have been mentioned are going to come together in a much more seamless fashion. So, you know, the convergence of how end users consume services and applications. I think that whole end user application and infrastructure space is going to be much more converged.
It'll be invisible.
Yeah. I mean, for me, in 2021, yeah, what is your business? 22, yeah. 21 and a half, yeah. Right? Somewhere in June, July. What does your business model look like? That's what your cloud should look like. You shouldn't be driven by the technologies, your business should drive it. That's as simple as it should be.
Similar to Duncan's statement.
Yeah.
I think Duncan summed it up perfectly. It's invisible and it's almost a don't care in terms of where it is.
And then Philip by then will be caring about the technology, so they're completely inverse.
Yeah, I'd actually go one step further. I think there will be a number of companies that, if they don't embrace this in a way which actually provides them with business value back out to their customers, we may not see them around at that time. And some of the participants in the market today that we expect as the given incumbents may not be those players of tomorrow, because lots of smaller companies that are fast to market and quick to adapt could easily embrace the model and move to market more quickly than the large players. This is disruptive technology, effectively, so those who I think capitalise on it could look very different as companies at that period, from the business side.
Asaf.
I think we will use IT just like the power grid example. It will be invisible, and at the same time we will have outages that will be very annoying. And we've seen the Amazon example as such. We will have them.
A lot of the failures happen because people didn't architect their applications correctly. So a lot of the people that got hit by that outage were people that relied on a very sort of poor architectural strategy. So Netflix carried on working because Adrian Cockcroft, who's the chief architect, knows how to architect a resilient solution and has done so for 20 or 30 years. So the companies got really hit badly by that were ones that were ill prepared for an outage. Outages are going to happen.
Okay, so let's call it a day now, and let's hand over to the next phase of the evening. I think you can see how that hung together in terms of cloud, where we kind of come from, marketing term to it is in actual fact all about service provision. I'm pretty passionate about how these new business models are coming about. I think that consensus from the panel around invisibility, and it's what you do with it, which is what matters. And when I've been talking to the panel leading up to this, that's been a common theme coming out. It's a philosophy, it's a way of doing your processes, which is so important. And the vendors who we've grown up with in the past, I think they're going to be very different. Looking forward, certainly by 2021. That was done kind of without a safety net. You can see me fumbling the papers. I hope it almost worked. So thank you, panel, in a normal way.